Thank you, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity to respond to some of the pertinent questions, the debate that came about. Some of the issues are recurring. Some need a bit more clarification from the ministry, maybe to engage and stimulate more debate, or maybe to put certain issues to rest. I will go through the submissions that came from each honourable member and try to address some of the issues that came about. And if on some the leader of government would want to chime in, I'll allow him to just press his mic and come in. We'll start off with Honourable Mukomberi, who gave the first submission and rehashed the ministry's growth projections. And there seems to be a lot of debate around the 6% growth figures that came about, issues to do with our rebasing as well from Zimstat. Let me start off with the growth projections. I know Honourable Flachwayo and Magdalena raised concern about these figures. Zimstat carried out an economic survey, a preliminary amount. There will be a concise, longer report, which will be made public. This August House is free to summon Zimstat to question their methodology, data collection, and how we came up to these figures. But Honourable Madam Speaker, the 6% growth figure and projection, while the IMF went to other jurisdictions to revise downwards, they actually concurred and acknowledged the 6% growth for Zimbabwe. So while some august members may not want growth, for us as Zimbabwe, those with the least motivation to corroborate our numbers have actually acknowledged and corroborated our numbers. These reports are public knowledge. The IMF has confirmed and corroborated our growth projections and that they are achievable, the World Bank, and there's no motivation to fudge these numbers and to lie to ourselves as a nation. I would urge that the honourable members who dispute these figures to do some fact-checking. Honourable Mukomberi brought about an issue which I think was commonly spread out amongst the honourable members, that we need to take caution as the Minister of Finance, particularly our economic development team, to make sure that when we talk about our gross national income per capita and becoming an upper middle income economy, there is social dividends. It is very easy to relax, especially as a mining rich country, to achieve certain figures, while this doesn't pass on to our communities. I think this is a factor that we as a ministry and as all of government are keeping track of to make sure that any growth translates into the economy, particularly for social services. You'll find that there are always conflicting requirements, whether for the budget, what we collect. Honourable Mukomberi bemoaned that our expenditure is heavy on the recurrent side. We seem to be spending more for recurrent than we are for capital expenditure, but also then bemoans that we should, as a ministry, be focusing more on social services. These are some of the conflicting messages we get as a ministry, and we try to balance and make sure that we are effectively spending for social services and growing our economy. There was a submission from the honourable member, and I think this also came from Honourable Magdalena, that there is a 14.3% variance in revenue targets. This is coming about from somewhat of a technical issue, Madam Speaker. When Zimra testified before the August House and mentioned that they had surpassed their revenue targets, they had indeed surpassed their revenue targets. As you know, Madam Speaker, as a nation, we are collecting 70 to 80% of our revenue in US dollars. 30% of it is in ZiG, but our reporting currency to this August House is in ZiG. When we formulated the budget last year, the Ministry of Finance took a very conservative approach on our inflation indexing. We had an inflation figure that we thought would cushion us in case there was any volatility. I'm glad to say, Madam Speaker, as an economy, we've performed way better than we had expected. Where we would have anticipated a 3% month-on-month inflation, we're actually sitting at 0.5 month-on-month inflation. What that means, Madam Speaker, is that where we had projected to collect 3.5 billion. If we do get 3.5 billion, it might seem as if we have not reached that target on an expenditure side when we convert it to ZEG, because we're still using our inflation index as a ministry. So this is where that slight technical issue is. But overall, performance has been better than what we'd anticipated, both on the revenue collection side and on an inflation side. It's unfortunate that our overperformance is now affecting our figures, particularly when it comes to the expenditure side. Madam Speaker, the honourable member raised some issues around budget utilization being below 50% for most ministries. Indeed, the first half of the year, which is the period under review, is one where we collect, on average, at least 40% of our revenue. So the expectation would be that at least all MDAs should be hovering around 40%. This has not been the case. But again, Madam Speaker, that element of our projection versus the actual reality would distort the utilization. But on a comparative basis, I think there's some work that needs to be done to get some of our social ministries to spend a bit more on the devolution. We launched a manual last year. Maybe we need to refamiliarize our local authorities on how to prepare projects to be devolution ready. There is a manual, there is a process. We found that this process has not been adhered to. Maybe it's something that we need to go on a re-education drive to make sure that local authorities access the devolution funding so that we are constitutionally bound by the 5% as we should be. Honorable Mkamberi also brings about an issue around the rebasing and how looking at our debt to GDP might not necessarily translate to our ability to pay. Instead, we should be looking at revenue to debt measure. And I would agree with the honorable member, Madam Speaker. A lot of these matrices are probably unfair to most African countries and developing countries. I think what we need to look at and what we need to encourage is quality borrowing. We need to borrow where we are sure and ring-fenced on paying back. I think as Treasury, that has been our focus. We'll borrow where cash flows are ring-fenced. Some of these debt to GDP, revenue to GDP figures are necessary for reporting purposes, but in terms of strategy, we are looking at it in a slightly different way. These were the submissions from Honorable Mkomberi. And then Honorable Mungani came up with a few submissions. Kwa mari yatanga takatarisira aina kusvika pataifungira vakapa muono kuti tiwedzere pakutora mari dzinofanira kunge dzichiuya pamukero. Isu sehurumende tinofanira kunge tichiwana zvikamu zvatinoti mashares muurongwa hwenyika kuri kupfuma vamwe. Taona chiri uri muono wakanaka, ndosaka kune mutsapa tichavakurudzira kuti pose panenge pane vamwe vatiri kuona vari kuchera vari kuvaka kwete kuti vasvika vachitora ipapo asi tichago pedu pasina kutorwa tione kuti zviri kuita vamwe takwanisa zviitawo senyika tichiwana mutero iyoyo. Vapamwe muono kuti Zimra ngaiyonewo mukama hwakanaka nevanhu kunyanya vasina kurejista kuitira kuti vakwanise kuuya vakasununguka kuzobhadhara mutero. Nezuro takaloncha inonzi terms iriyo tax and revenue management system yeZimra iyo inobvisa kana ngati kusanganisa kwevashandi veZimra nemabhizinisi. Pari zvino kana une business rako unokwanisa kuenda pafoni pako painternet paiPad palaptop woregister business rako. Kakawanda vanhu vanotya kuenda kuZimra nokuti vanotya kubatwa nemhosva. Saka kuti munazive kuti mari dzandiri kubhadhara kuna vanhu vandinofanira kunge ndichibhadhara dzishoma here pane dzandinofanira kunge ndichipa Zimra, muone wanenge asina. Izvozvi zvapane terms wakukwanisa kuenda inokudzidzisa yoga kuti iwe sebhizinisi unofanira kunge uri papi. Are you a small business, medium business, large business? Unofanira kunge uchibhadhara mutero wakadini, mareturns ako anoitwa sei. Izvozvo zvinobatsira kuti vanhu vane mabhizinisi madiki vakwanise kuzvifundisa pasina kutya kuenda kuZimra kuti zvimwe pamwe ndikanobatwa nemhosva ndotorera business rangu. Vataura zvenhau yambotaura navamukomberi vakataurawo nyaya yeBeam. Madam Speaker, mbato wechigaro, nyaya yeBeam nyaya yatiri kugarira pasi isu seMinistry of Finance, Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Public Service. Mukutenderera kwemari ikoko pane zvanga zvisina kuringana, asi inyaya yaramba ichiuya, inyaya yatakagarira sedare under 3 makurukota iwawo. Honorable Mshoriwa, Madam Speaker, came up with what seemed to be a constitutional court application. He cited section 288, 289. Honorable Mshoriwa submitted what would appear to be a constitutional court application. He cited various provisions, section 289, section 299, section 305, but the import of his submissions, Madam Speaker, were around condonation and use of the UR. There might be some interpretation issues around some of these provisions, but what I can assure the House, Madam Speaker, is the Ministry of Finance and the Honourable Member then acknowledged that we are indeed following the law, but seem to be, I guess, in his view, avoiding certain issues. I think, Madam Speaker, this is an issue that, as a ministry, we will separately deal with. At this juncture, I'm not entirely sure what the suggestion from the Honourable Member was for this particular one, but it is well noted that there have been subsequent condonation bills or adjustment bills that have not entered this august House. We will come up with the best way to consolidate all that and be in right standing with this august House if we're found wanting in that regard. He also noted that the Ministry of Finance did not submit its financial statements to the Auditor General. This is something that, as a ministry, we should fact check and actually verify. I'm sure the audit report is out, and if there was any impropriety on that, we'll make those submissions.
Commend the government.
He spoke to the budget disbursement matrix, not speaking to what is usually agreed by Parliament, Madam Speaker. And I think the import of that is to maybe diminish the long hours that both the Ministry of Finance and Parliament spend in actually formulating the budget. Madam Speaker, when the utilization figures come out, it is not out of a discretionary disbursement from the Ministry of Finance on how we see fit and whom should be getting money faster than anybody else. But there are processes that happen before monies are actually dispersed. Some ministries would tend to be more efficient than others. Others tend to contract before with Treasury or before clearing some of their debts. So there's a lot of administrative work in the background that might not these ministries to align particularly, but it has been noted that we need to stick to this to the budget. If there are areas where over the years our budget seems to be overshooting for particular ministries, then maybe at the next budget it is the right time to actually allocate the right amounts to each ministry as the trend has been seen, so that we do not make a mockery of the process that we all go through, Madam Speaker. And this came from Honorable Mshriwa, and I think also came from Honorable Madziwanika and Honorable Shashlaya. It's around the issues of our domestic debt. There's an implication or an insinuation that there's been a lot of borrowing and that the Zimstat rebasing is to lower our debt to GDP ratio so that we can continue to borrow, and this is what has increased our domestic debt. And while, as a country, we actually applaud the fact that despite the sanctions that are there and no international credit lines, there is space to borrow without crowding out the private sector. But I need to correct some of the figures. The 8.9 billion increase in domestic debt has come out of settling legacy debts, Madam Speaker. The Ministry of Finance assumed 3.5 billion legacy debts from the Reserve Bank. This happened and was condoned by this same August House. This was done to make sure that the Reserve Bank would never again have to print money so that they can pay external obligations. This was a major cause of hyperinflation, the quasi-fiscal activities. When that statutory instrument, when that law was passed, and this debt moved on to the Ministry of Finance, it ensured by law that there is fiscal discipline. So this was a necessary assumption. It might be heavy, but it is the fruits of that stability are what is showing. There was the global compensation deed, 3.5 billion as well, which was part of this arrears clearance process and certain obligations with former farm owners. That deed is a further 3.5 billion that is sitting on our balance sheet. There's also the 1.9 billion that was used for the recapitalization, or is going to be owed for the recapitalization of Mtapa, our sovereign wealth fund. So the assertion that there's been a huge increase in domestic borrowing that is going to crowd out the private sector is not true. As a matter of fact, Madam Speaker, the main thrust of our economic strategy is to have a private sector-led economy. As government, at the advent of the Second Republic, it was important to capacitate and show our local contractors that it is possible for a Zimbabwean company to do a road. It is possible for a Zimbabwean company to build dams. Right now, all the roads that are being built, that are being done in Zimbabwe, are being done by Zimbabwean companies. The government had to put its best leg forward in terms of economic and ideological and psychological thrust that you do not need a foreign company to come in. That does not necessarily mean that the government should be funding roads, but it was a necessary first step. What we're now doing, Madam Speaker, to allow government treasury not to spend short-term money for long-term projects is to assign a lot of these government projects prescribed asset status. A lot of these projects are economically viable. We're going through asset recycling. We're actually in talks with Africa 50 to raise financing through the Harare Beit Bridge Road. They will take over a portion of it, and that will unlock new funding for something else. Government does not need to be engaging in any of these projects, but we need to capacitate the private sector. So this is a very deliberate exercise that we're going through. Honorable Sakupwanya, proper debate on increasing the tax base versus increasing taxes, and I do agree. I think as discussions towards November for the 2026 budget come up, we hope that this becomes a recurring theme on how we can increase the tax base, formalize the informal, and come up with ideas both as legislature and as government so that we can increase and widen that tax base. You also spoke about how, as government, we should probably come up with an employment benefit scheme. I think this is a noble idea, and I wish that we can get more on that so that we have more youth development, particularly in the sports. Honorable Shlachwayo questioned the growth rate figures premised on revisions of other global economies. I think I've already given a response to that. She is free to fact check on some of these issues. Honorable Riwayo also gave us a debate and insight on economic growth versus economic development. Again, this is to make sure that in our journey towards being an upper middle income economy, we are looking at both growth factors and growing our economy. And he also gave us some insights as to the milestones government has taken, even under the harsh economic sanctions that were meant to cripple our country, but still giving us confidence in Zimbabwe that Zimbabwe will be built by Zimbabweans. Honorable M. Komo gave us a rundown on challenges and opportunities. Honorable Changirai painted what would appear to be a gloomy picture, but Madam Speaker, I did not see any engagement with the midterm review budget. It seemed as if he was giving his own view, and it is accepted. Those comments and those notes are also captured. Honorable Madziwanika, as usual, Madam Speaker, Honorable Madziwanika likes to confuse the House when it comes to figures by comparing apples and oranges and using the wrong graphs. And what this does is it gives it gives a very emotional and contentious figure, but completely false and completely wrong. You spoke about how power can grow from a certain percentage to a certain percentage, but he knows that the period of reporting of contribution to GDP of electricity, gas, as stated in the budget review, was from 2023 to 2024, and this is when Wange 7 and 8 came on grid. This is not open for debate, Madam Speaker. This is national. There was an expectation that we get audited financial statements from our sovereign wealth funds. I would agree in that. I think right now what we've been having is maybe different audited financial statements from different entities, but none that are consolidated. I think this is an expectation that both he and ourselves also have. And we also made an assertion that the local borrowing crowds out the private sector. Again, a notion that we would want to dispute and actually state that as Treasury, we are aligned with the private sector in making sure that we catalyze their growth. In our discussion on arrears clearance, there's the issue of legacy debts, but our submissions have always been around if Zimbabwe is unable to borrow because of a certain list.
So what we're going to do is we're going to go down.
Then what is prohibiting our private sector? And these are some issues that we're unpacking as well, so that where as government we're still having debates or discussions around our debt issues, the private sector can catalyze the economy as espoused in our strategy. We also questioned the Zimbra surplus figures versus the revenue spend, and I would hope that my explanation around our inflation indexing as a ministry at budget formulation versus the actual prevailing inflation would answer that. And it is not a signal of a weak macroeconomic framework, but rather a signal of an economy that is performing much better than we'd anticipated at budget formulation. Honorable Makumire again also painted another gloomy picture without any engagement with the budget review, and I did receive the point around the devolution, and this is something that I think we need to work together with the local authorities. Those would be my submissions, Madam Speaker.